Welcome back. Today I've got my good friend Bill Heckert. He's going to be sharing his story of God's grace, and I know it will blow your mind. So don't you go anywhere. We're going to have that story in just a minute.
We will be the ones to see it through, and everything lost will be renewed. Long ago in the garden it was to be, now a dream fulfilled in you and me.
All right, Bill. Thanks for coming. I know that sharing your heart and sharing your life is, it can be difficult to remember everything, but also it can be difficult just going through everything and making sure you make all the points and all the things. So, but also, you're my very first guest. After all these episodes of doing the podcast, you're my first guest. So congratulations, Bill.
Thank you.
If you want to just introduce yourself a little bit, where you're from.
Yeah, my name's William Heckert, actually. I'm from northern Ohio, Fremont, Ohio. Born and raised, but I've lived in Connecticut, Pennsylvania, Florida, and Tennessee. And I've actually stayed in Tennessee longer than anywhere else.
Oh, yeah.
Other than home.
Well, Tennessee's the best place.
Right. Because I only lived a couple years or a few years everywhere else.
Yeah. Well, I don't want to take too long because this is a big story. This is a lot of things. So I'll just let you get into it. Just kind of start at the beginning from a young age of how your life was, and we'll go through the story.
All right. Well, growing up, when I was little, I was always allowed to drink. And, the first time I recall ever being drunk, actually, I was only about 5. I was drinking my mother's, I think it was cherry vodka. And I was having a great time until I got sick. So that wasn't such a great time. But I was always allowed to drink growing up. And I know that was something you wanted me to touch on. But by the time I was 6, I had the realization of evil. And, I chose the dark side because, it was late, whatever you want to do. So, obviously that was very tempting because, especially a little kid, just be able to do what you want or get what you want or serve evil for riches and so on and so forth is rather tempting. And, by the time, I was 10, I was a total Satanist. And, from there I'd started studying black magic, but it was really studying black magic is where I realized I was wrong. I was on the wrong side, and I totally turned to God. I completely did a 180 in life because I realized I was so wrong. The first time that I went to pray, because I knew all the nasty things that I have said, and it wasn't like I did a lot to people, it was more of where my heart lied, and I was just totally gung-ho Satanist, and I was a total devil worshiper by the time I was 10.
Yeah. Well, we'll get right back to some of that, but so you were talking about your childhood and how enticing evil was. A lot of that is partly due to the fact of how you were basically doing whatever you wanted without guidance and supervision. And so you mentioned alcohol at 5 years old, and kind of share the progression of some of the things that happened from 5 to 10 years old.
I know you wanted me to mention. Yeah, I first time I was ever sexually active was like 7 years old. No, it wasn't. I was not the pursuer, but it wasn't. And I've had people say something. Oh, well, you were molested. No, I was a willing participant.
Yeah.
It wasn't that I was molested. It was I already knew what was up, and it was like, yeah.
Well, exactly, and it's it's the heart. Now, it doesn't change the fact that it was wrong to be in those situations. A child shouldn't be put in those situations, but that's the circumstances. That's what you're dealing with. And so, like you said, you had that realization of the empowerment of evil. And
right.
So, that's at 7 years old, already sexually active. I know in our culture we're seeing a lot more of that type of thing, but at that point in history, that was, that wasn't a normal situation for a child.
History.
Throughout history, children have not been exposed to those types of environments on a regular basis. I'm not saying there aren't exceptions, but that, to me, that's one of the things that struck me about your life. And so that's at 7 years old. At 9 and 10 years old, you said you're already a Satanist at 10. You said alcohol at 5 and drugs are at, we were talking before, you said 9 years old.
Yeah. First time I ever, well, I might even have been about 8 with my sisters, because I had 3 older sisters, and, what's all we did was party, dude. Not only was I allowed to drink at home, like when we had parties and things like that, because my dad would have like 5 huge parties every year. And, but other than that, I grew up by a summer resort and everybody there partied. We used to go out, on the weekends and stuff like that, and all go party, and we all would go down to this big dance hall, and, my dad would take multiple tables and have like 12 people there with pitchers of beer, and we'd go get trash. I was a little kid, and, other than that, I used to hang out with my sisters. We all used to go to the drive-in together, man, and, we'd have cases of beer in the car with us, and, I think I was probably about 8 when I smoked weed with my sisters, but definitely 9. When I was about 9, the first time I ever recall smoking a joint by myself, I was about 9. And I remember it was Red Bud and Strawberry Papers. And I was pretty stoned. But I thought it was great. I loved it, But anyway, and of course, I partied for years up until my kids were born. Once my daughter was born, that was it, dude. And when my oldest daughter was born, that's when I just stopped doing everything, really.
Yeah.
And
and that happens for a lot of people, thankfully. A friend of mine says that our children are for our salvation a lot of times, because a lot of times it does. It puts us in perspective to realize, hey, this thing in my life's got to go because I have to take care of somebody. And, talking about this was your life. You weren't taken care of and parented that way. And so having that realization because of the process that we're about to tell a little bit more of the details in your life, that's a wonderful thing that you were able to step up and be a totally different man than your parents were.
I totally. And not only that, I was, in between there, right, and I know we're going to go over more details, but in between there, I had actually, when I first got saved, I had totally stopped partying too, but I didn't go to church or anything, so, eventually I'm back with, doing cocaine and doing, just, but I still considered myself a Christian, but I never went to church or nothing. I never spent time in
build
church.
On that foundation.
No, that's just it, dude. I absolutely loved God. I just, partying and doing drugs is all I knew.
Yeah, that was your life.
Right. That was it. All my friends all partied.
Well,
that's all we did.
That's the awesome thing about this story is, Jesus talked about the sowing of the seeds. Some seed fell among thorns and was choked out. You could have been choked out. Right. And Satan tried to choke you out many different times, but you responded each time to God, and I love that, because that could have easily happened to you. And so I praise God for the fact that He held on to you and you continue to follow Him. Okay, so let's go back to about 12, 13 years old when you really started dabbling into witchcraft.
Well, I probably about 12, I started really studying black magic and witchcraft and things like that. But then I had acquired a book from a friend of mine that was definitely, it was someone that I'd met they definitely had studied that kind of stuff for years. And I'd end up getting a book from them. In fact, I traded them like $300 worth of stuff for this book. It was actually black, bound in red, with the Eye of Horus inscribed in gold on it. And if you open that book, in the center of the book, it had Baphomet in it. It was a drawing by Alphas Levi Dell of Baphomet. One half of the book, the first half of the book, was all sorcery, red magic of the pyramids. It was all Egyptian sorcery. And the other half of the book was all European grimoires. It was called the Grand Grimoire, which is all the grimoires combined. I mean, you hear about like selling your soul to the devil and stuff like that. Well, the recipe book for doing exactly that was in there. There was over 150 demon signatures to summons in that book. But that's one of the things, by studying that, is how I actually, that's how I realized I was on the wrong side.
Yeah.
That's how I realized I was wrong, because they tried to manipulate angels. Like the whole thing in a lot of those books, they, like the whole circle that you stand in to protect yourself from the demons you're summoning, is all like angels' names and stuff. So they try to manipulate both sides. They try to use good to protect them from the evil they're invoking to do their bidding. I mean, it's straight up. In that book, there was over 150 demons, all the way from Lucifer down.
Yeah. So as they're selling and teaching darkness, how to sell your soul to the devil, how do you become a slave?
Still trying to use God to protect you.
Yeah, and that's what I love about your story is that's what woke you up. That's what
right. That it is. It is, and that's what it was. Is they were still trying to manipulate, holy. I don't want to say Holy Spirits, because there's only Holy Spirit, but right.
But they understood that the good had the power to stop the evil.
Exactly, and that's what really, really, made me wake up. It was. I mean, that's what's messed up. I'm studying black magic, studying summoning demons and necromancy and all this stuff that really made me what made me realize you're on the wrong side, dude.
And that's the Holy Spirit. That's the power of God. He's taken a child who has been exposed to all different kinds of things that a child shouldn't. It is abuse. It was abuse. You lived through abusive things, whether your parents intended abuse or not, by neglect and by the circumstances of your life. You were mentally, emotionally, and spiritually abused. And the struggle of that causes damage, causes scars, causes choices. But God saw you. And so he uses the very instrument of Satan that is selling your soul and controlling it. And he brings you to him through that. I love that.
That's actually what totally changed me. It did. I started realizing I was on the wrong side. And, by the time I did a 180, I just bawled for like 45, 50 minutes trying to pray. The first time I went to pray, I just bawled my eyes out for, 45, 50 minutes, man, because I knew all the nasty stuff that had come out of my mouth, I was a pretty vile kid. But and it was right, shortly before I turned 16, I just completely changed, man. I mean, did a total 180 and was very, very remorseful and repentant of all the stuff I've done and said. Yeah. And
all the Antichrist, demonic.
I was total Antichrist. I mean, I wouldn't say anti-Christian, because I wasn't like out after people. It was just, I was gung-ho all about Satan. I was, the people were nothing. I was all about Lucifer, man. And I just, but.
Well, so let's talk about that part in your life, because you just talked about the brokenness and the weeping for as God, that's God cleansing you. That when he does that, when that brokenness comes in, he's cleansing us from so many of the thoughts, so many of the impurification that we've willingly taken on in our life, and the choices and that brokenness. But what led you to that? Like you said, you were seeing that you're on the wrong side, but you were dealing with depression and struggles in your life.
Well, yeah, and it was my girlfriend had got sent away to Connecticut. In fact, it was the woman I ended up marrying, and we'll get there. But her mother sent her away to Connecticut to get away from me, basically, because I was such a vile creature. And so I mean, I ended up doing like a month and a half in the psych ward on meds and everything, because that's how I know how to play chess so well. That's all I did.
Yeah.
But
Which
Yeah,
we haven't
I spent-
tested our skills yet. I still got to play you in chess.
Yeah. Well, I've beaten state champions, so we're gonna check that.
Well, see, I don't play. I don't necessarily play fair. I distract my opponents
Well, yeah.
as much as I play
That
the
works.
game.
That works. That works. Anyway, but yeah, I mean, I went in psych ward and all that, but that was after I already got saved. I already got saved, and and then I was and that was why they put me in there for depression, because I got saved and I totally changed. And I just was staying at home, didn't go see nobody, didn't hang out with nobody, didn't go party, nothing, man.
Mm-hmm.
And they put me in a psych ward for it when I was like, right, they put me on meds.
Well, they didn't understand that. They didn't know the change and what was going on in your heart.
Right.
They didn't understand that. That to them, there's something wrong.
Right. I totally that was it. I totally changed. Yeah, that's exactly what happened, pretty much.
Well, so this turning point that you're describing, and one of the things that is unique about your testimony, not that no one has had similar type of things, but one of the things that stands out to me is that because you came to the Lord in such an organic, natural way, meaning that it wasn't somebody coming to you, it wasn't you going, being involved in a group of people that were teaching you and discipling you with knowledge of the scriptures and things like that, which is good. That's not bad, but ultimately every one of us have to encounter God on that natural level.
No, honestly, and yes, I mean what you're getting at is, and that's the way I actually see it. It was like I basically turned to evil by the devil. Pretty much nobody got me into it. But then I also turned to God by God.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Well, exactly.
That's what,
and that's a key point.
right. And there was really nobody interacting with me in between there. You know what I mean? It was just new.
Well, and I'll preach on that point for just a minute, because I think this is something that the church kind of needs to grab a hold of. We need to understand that even if it's a child who's raised in a Christian home, who's never been exposed to a lot of different evil, coming to the Lord, the reality is God's dealing with that person. We think of it, well, they've learned, they've understood what baptism is, they understand what this is, and so we're like, okay, you're responding to the Lord. But the reality is, it is an individual relationship with God that everyone must have, and a lot of times we're not allowing that. We're actually packaging our faith into so much teaching and so much control that the person isn't able to fully develop that or even experience it at all. Sometimes salvation, honestly, from my perspective, is they just believe because it's groupthink. They're part of a group that does this, and so that's what they do. And that's not a bad thing. It's good to have positive influence of peer pressure in our life. That positive peer pressure is a good thing. But ultimately, you have to know God. You have to encounter Him. And so there's no way to describe what happened to you but by anything other than God did it Himself.
Right. And that was one of the things, man. Like I said, I bawled. I mean, I have just done totally anti-Christian, blasphemous type of stuff. You know what I mean? Like turning the cross upside down and spitting on the cross. I mean, it was crucifixes and stuff, which, but I, just stuff that I was very remorseful of doing, man, and knew that I was wrong, and that's the stuff that. I mean, a lot of the just nasty stuff that's come out of my mouth, and
yeah. Well, and when you're in that type of life, the influences around you and the choices that you're making at very young age. Most people aren't making those choices until late teenage years, and you're experiencing this at 5, 6, 7 years old. The beginning of a lot of those things, a lot of people don't even encounter until later. So you have those are we call them the formative years of your life being formed. You didn't even get a chance to experience the just the years of childhood where you don't even think about life in the sense of beyond I want to have fun today, and that's the simplicity of it, that actually because you're exposed to it, you actually went to Satanism, like you said. It was exciting. It gives you the power to do what you want.
Do what you want,
yeah.
Right? It's all about do what you want and do what you want and get evil and serve the devil, because the devil governs riches, right? That was the whole thing. That was the whole concept.
So after this turning, after you've had this point, and this is over several years period of time in your life, you you said you started to go to a church.
Yeah, I'd actually. There was about the time I was 17. I was actually because I wanted to read the whole Bible. I was planning on reading the Bible cover to cover. All right. But when I got to so and so, we got so and so, we got so and so. After about 150, I couldn't take it anymore. It's like, okay, man, I'm going to go to the New Testament. I want to know what Jesus said.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because that's what it's all about. And but
He's the center of history and the center of our lives, and knowing what he has to say is important.
Right, and that was it. Is I wanted to know what Jesus said, because I knew Jesus was real, man.
Yeah.
It wasn't, there wasn't. Again, it wasn't like I didn't go to church with anybody.
Well, let me give a plug about my podcast.
Right.
I just had an episode about faith that just came out, and so understanding that, because what you just described is that you're not believing something that you just were told, and
Right.
even if you were told something true, that's the key is you can believe lies, but when you've encountered God, it's not about a belief. You know who God is. You encountered him, the reality. And there's not a matter of, well, if something goes awry and later in life something happens, you can be like, well, you know what I was taught, it wasn't real. You don't have that. You know it's real, and you can't ever be shaken from that foundation. That's the sure foundation of faith.
Solid rock I stand, man. That's it, dude. And it's like, I love God more than my children. And I want my children to love God more than me.
Yeah.
Not that they do, but
We'll get there in just a little bit. That's another thing, because we were talking about how this story is about you coming to the Lord, but it's also about the process of the years following that. So back to the church that you went to.
Okay, I went to the church. I went to a church, and I was actually going with a friend of mine, because this was a non-denominational church. But I was going with a friend of mine because he actually was forced to go to church. I actually wanted to go with him, but we would literally go in the parking lot playing like Metal Church and Malice and all this stuff, like metal, driving like this real nice Trans Am. We used to bring that, and it had a, killer stereo. But we'd literally, every time we pulled in the driveway, they made sure they had it cranking metal every time. But, because like I said, he was being forced to go there.
Yeah.
But I actually wanted to go. And but I really liked the way the preacher spoke and what he preached about, and I really liked it. And I asked him to baptize me. Well, we got to have a meeting and all this stuff. I felt like he was going to judge whether I was worthy to be baptized.
Yeah.
And that really kind of offended me, man. And I had much less desire to go. I really liked this dude. I liked the way he preached, and it was like,
And that's a great point, because the truth is he may have been a really good guy,
right,
and he may not have intended it that way, but when you're approaching someone who has come to the Lord, and I call it Christianese. We speak a language that someone in the world doesn't understand, and so we talk about things, and they're like, I don't know what you mean, or it feels awkward. Like in your case, it felt like he was judging you when he may not have intended it, but that's what came across, and it pushed you out of the church.
Right. Well, and that's what my friend had told me, though. He was like, well, he was just, because they were making excuses for him right away. Mm-hmm. But, he just wanted to know whether you actually been saved, right, and realized
and that's, I know a lot of people who feel that way.
That was the whole thing. But I was asking him to be baptized, you know what I mean? And for him to, we need to have a meeting, and discuss this. No, I'm asking you to be baptized. I want to be baptized.
Yeah, exactly. Well, our religion has to meet reality. These are points that I make. I talk about different things in my podcast. That's one of the things that I talk about, is how we've got to understand that the way we think of things oftentimes is just a packaged thing that's not really close to the reality. And so the reality of understanding, when you encounter someone, their life is turned around, and there's nothing wrong with asking questions and him wanting to know your story a little bit, but we also, a lot of times we're like, okay, well, have you gone through all the steps of the the Romans road to salvation? Do you understand that? Have you done this? And you may not even know what the Romans road to salvation is still, because that's a little more technical. I don't know what that is. It's a little more technical than and that's not bad. I'm not saying it's bad, because the Romans road to salvation describes our salvation, how we are sinners and how we come to the Lord, and what you had already experienced, but you don't know that in the scriptural level. There's nothing wrong with teaching that and explaining that, but the reality is, when you meet God, you meet God. And no amount of, I love this part, because God's grace is so powerful that he reaches us while we're still sinners. Jesus died for us while we're still sinners. His love reaches us while we're still sinners, and he reaches out to us and he shows us who he is, and we respond or we don't. And when we respond, we're embraced.
You know, and that's what's always held me on. You know, even through all the tough times, rough times, I and him and he and me, man. I'm solid rock. I stand. I know what's up, and you know, God knows me. God knows my heart, and you know, even when I wasn't in the best of places, you know, exactly. I
preach it.
Still,
go for it.
You know, I you know what I'm saying. I just, you know, he is, and I don't really. And, you know, because of all the things that, you know, where I know things I've said and done, and, you know what I mean? I don't really like to come off like I'm St. William, you know, because I'm not. You know what I'm saying?
But you are in before God. I know what you're saying. I totally feel you. But we have this idea of that
holier than thou.
Exactly. But the truth is, when God calls us, that's what we become. The Bible calls us saints. We become saints. We're made pure. We're made holy before God. Even though we still make many choices that are wrong, the process is what we're in. The salvation of who we are and the things of the past, and our soul is being cleansed and renewed. Romans 12 says, you know, to have our minds renewed, you know, right. And that's the process that we're in.
Well, and part of that too, by the way, is I don't want to come off like I am St. William and, you know, have people think that I'm just, you know, oh, I'm St. William and then not be, versus I'd rather you think that I'm total dirtbag and not be than think that I'm some saintly person and not be, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It goes back into the whole hypocrisy type thing, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, you know, there's all different levels of that. That's a great place to be. I agree with you. I don't want to be walking into a room and somebody's like, oh yeah, that's Nehemiah Ward. He's a minister of the gospel and he has a podcast. Well, you know, like that's some big deal. But we can do that. And having that humility of like, you know what, I'm just a follower of Jesus. That's all I am, and my heart longs to know him more. And if that is something that he pours into me that I can touch other people and teach other people, then great. That's what I want him to do it. So during this time, this is not long after that church experience. Your girlfriend from high school age,
it had been a few years
right.
in between there.
Okay, she's been away. She comes back to Ohio.
Yeah, comes back. Yeah, with 2 kids from 2 different guys.
Oh, yeah?
Should have been my first clue.
Yeah, should have given you a little bit of a clue. A little bit of a clue of what you were supposed to be doing.
Right.
But like I said, this is the process. You know, I know a little bit. Some these type of things can make us uncomfortable. Well, I was serving the Lord, but I did this, but I did that. But that's okay. It's not that process, not that the mistake is okay, but that the process that God has you in, he knows where he's working. And we want to judge and say, well, you made that mistake, so you obviously didn't know Jesus. But so okay, I'll go back. Okay, so your girlfriend moves back to town.
Yeah, she moved back to town and pursued me pretty insistently. So I wasn't all that enamored with her at this point, but you know, she was pretty persistent. So we ended up together, and then she got pregnant. Obviously,
how old again? This is 21 years.
Well, yeah, I'm probably like 21 about this time, and she ended up getting pregnant, and then well, I don't know if you want to put this in here, so we'll
go for it.
Little break. Well, I mean, and in between that time, because again, and I wasn't really all that into her, she just kept coming around, and obviously we were sleeping together. And, but anyway, once she got pregnant, she started playing little head games, and then we weren't together. I mean, because that, you know, definitely after she was pregnant, we were together, you know what I mean? But then she was playing little head games with me, and we weren't together. And, you know, I was talking about getting back with her ex-husband and all this crap, and so on and so forth, you know, because Jay wanted his dad and, you know, Jason. Mm-hmm. But
all the dynamics of those kind of relationships.
Yeah, that was all my stepson. And she, you know, like I said, was playing little head games, and then you know, one night I was out drinking with some friends, and I didn't want to drive home, and this one lady had given me a ride home. Well, she was supposed to be giving me a ride home. She was supposed to be taking me home and took me to her house and said, "Is this okay?" And of course, I said, you know. But anyway, I have another daughter, like that's only 4 months away from my oldest, And I mean, literally, I had all 3 of my kids in 1 year to the day. My son and daughter were born April 25th of 91 and 92.
Yeah.
But in between there, because my ex-wife, who wasn't my wife at that point, was playing little head games, and I ended up having a one-night stand with somebody else.
Yeah.
And so I have another daughter who is also very resentful that she's brought up a one-night stand too, of course, and that's understandable. But she is real, and she's another story altogether.
Well, and so I like to touch on different biblical things as we're going through that kind of. A lot of these things are difficult. Yes, it's sin, it's wrong, but the real reason why it's wrong is because of this. The product of a child being born in these type of circumstances ends up making their life difficult, and they end up having resentment, they end up having bitterness, and
very resentful.
And their life becomes tormented or destroyed by those things. And so that, it's not just about right and wrong. Yes, God said don't do it, so we shouldn't do it. But if we understand that this is something that is really more about what happens because of doing the wrong, not that God said don't do it, so it's wrong, but that it really does harm people. It destroys people's life, makes life difficult, makes it where you can't have that connection and the unity. You're supposed to be connected with your children, but they're separated because of the one-night stand or because of the circumstances of a bad relationship. And I'm not judging anyone who has gone through that. The grace of God covers all those types of things, but we do have to recognize and see it. And that's why I like to preach that. I like to show that, hey, it's not just about, I made a mistake, so I sinned. No, what I did is really wrong. It messes somebody's life up. And so that's what I like to point out about that kind of thing.
She's pretty messed up, too. Anyway, that's a whole nother story.
So through this process, she came back at 21. Then you guys got
we got together, and then of course, we had 2 kids. We didn't actually get married until I got informed I was getting married. I was bringing home about $1,000 a week after checks and everything, and we had a pretty good stash saved up.
This is in the 90s.
Yeah,
that's pretty good money.
Yeah, and so she spends like $5,000 on wedding rings and comes and tells me we're getting married. Oh, okay. And of course I wasn't going to argue because I didn't want to lose my kids, man. Yeah. So I got married, but I didn't actually want to marry her. Yeah. Because of all the stuff. Because she, we've had many discussions about God, and I've tried to tell her and so on and so forth, and she's still like doubting whether God exists type thing. You know what I mean? And
your life at this point is starting to take that turn. You've already had the kids, and you're starting to take that, getting away from partying and getting away from the things.
Oh no, I'd gotten away from partying. Like soon as Cassandra was born, man, I was done. I mean, I was pretty much going to work, man. I got a daughter, dude. Yeah. You know what I mean? But I mean, I used to. I did. Of course, I know you know this, but I used to do lead vocals in a metal band and stuff. So I've been around a little bit, but. Yeah, I mean, and that's all I did was party, man. I mean, like my younger, I mean, again, and that was even after I got saved.
Well, just another fact about your life. You were working. Didn't you go back to school during this time too?
Well, I did. I went back to school and got a divorce, right? in the middle of it, right? Yeah, I went back to school, microcomputer electronics engineering, and during the middle of going to school, that's when she started playing more little head games, pretty vile about the whole thing. And then, just tried to screw up my life for every way, shape, and form she possibly could, man. Ruin my credit and everything. I mean, just
having an affair on you?
Yeah. Well, she proclaimed she wasn't actually having an affair, but she moved out, and then, of course, she was seeing him at that point.
Yeah.
But,
so it's getting more and more messed up.
Yeah. And that was the whole thing. Her leaving was no real big deal. Losing my kids was everything, man. That messed my head up good. I mean, totally for about 5 years. I mean, big time. Because that's what crushed me about the whole thing was losing my kids. Yeah.
But God has a plan. He continues to move, even in these difficult circumstances. But so God moving, and after the divorce, your wife is living hours away from you?
Well, yeah, probably about an hour and a half or something like that. But, and I seen on the kids on the weekends and things, but I was actually wanting to move to Florida to see about working at a particular place, down for animation and stuff. But anyway, that's a whole nother story. But I ended up moving about 2 hours away. Well, that's what it was, because I was wanting to see about around Orlando. And I was, thinking about, well, how can I move down there type thing, and get stuff situated to move around Orlando. Well, about 2 weeks later, I have a friend of mine say, hey, you want to move to Florida? Got a job for you. But that ended up being in Okeechobee. He originally said it's around Orlando, right?
Yeah.
So I totally committed to that. He had me lined up, and it was like, I didn't get to see my kids that often anyway. I had to go drive an hour and a half to go get them. And then, they stayed with me a couple days every 2 weeks, So I left, man.
Yeah, and that becomes more and more difficult as you're going through that kind of thing. And so as you're going into that time period, I think God was. I always say this: when God is sculpting something, a person's life, we're always looking to see the face. We want to see the details that we're interested in, but God may be sculpting a foot, and so we're like, "What are you doing, God? What are you doing?" And so the order that we think a person's life is supposed to go, God does it in a unique way, and especially in the circumstances that your life was. I think the separation away from all these types of things didn't take place in your life until you went to Florida.
Dude, I'm telling you, that was just it. I mean, I was just couldn't take it. And it was one thing after another. And then, I just thought, yeah.
And so God begins this process of separating you, out of of this life that you've been living. Even though you've been serving God and wanting to pursue God, you're still entangled with so many things around you. And so this process of going to Florida, that's what I see when I hear your story, is that God's taken that opportunity to okay, now I'm going to remove Bill from this so I can begin to lead him the direction I want him to
get away
take.
from the nonsense. Yeah. Of course, constant games.
So you get to Florida. I know some different details you've told me about that, but the experience of living down there and the jobs you were working, what was going on with that?
Well, I went down there. I was running. What part?
What jobs were you doing? And
a job. I was actually working for Cab Jink, and that's why I just took the job. I got offered a job. I mean, because I have got a lot of experience on forklift and stuff like that. I was actually running a big Wiggins forklift, doing like 14 pallets and doing vacuum cooling, running vacuum coolers like anhydrous ammonia type stuff, and like that facility alone, and they've expanded since I've left. That facility alone, we're like doing like 1.5 million pounds of like cabbage and stuff like that. I worked all the time down there, man. A week we'd do like 1.5 million pounds of cabbage a week down there. And anyway, that I mean, down there really, I just worked all the time. Really, I mean, I lived in Florida, but I never went to the beach. I went to Jensen Beach one time and went and looked at the ocean and left. And other than that, I mean, I pretty much worked, and then I actually started helping run a internet cafe down there. And of course, that's how I got into playing World of Warcraft and all that stuff, because I had kids in there all day, every day playing World of Warcraft. But anyway, and then just from there, I left and moved up here. A friend of mine that I'd met at the computer shop, because it was a computer shop too. That's what he used to work on computers, and doing. Well, like I said, it was an internet cafe, so we did coffee and the whole nine. But, and a friend of mine, I ended up, after I got laid off at Cabbage Inc., because I was just doing that like part-time. I mean, I was there a lot, but I was really working there, and I was getting unemployment, and because I would have to claim that, I would claim it, and I was doing that. But I mean, I used to hang out there pretty much all the time. But
how long were you down there?
Like 3.5 years. No, during that time, it was like 3.5 years, but I actually went up when I was working for Cabbage Inc. I've been, like, I'd have to go to North Carolina for a few weeks, then a couple months in Michigan or Ohio, and then spent a few weeks in Kentucky, and just traveled around a lot.
Yeah.
And then pretty much was just I rented a little apartment. By the time before I moved, I was just renting a little like apartment and had all my stuff in storage.
Yeah.
But
so then you ended up coming to the
friend of
promised
mine,
land.
yeah, friend of mine talked me into moving up here because I was on unemployment at that time, and he ended up talking me into moving up here, and he lives in Orlando now, by the way. But yeah, and
Here's
just,
Tennessee, by the way.
yeah, the great state of Tennessee.
Yes, the great, very great.
But that I can't say.
No, I joke about that, but I've been, I've visited a lot of different places by my standard, not necessarily like some other people. And I've always said that I love the different places that I've seen up the East Coast and Florida, the West Coast, the mountains, Colorado. I love Colorado, but I would choose to live here. This is the place I would choose to live.
Actually, living in Connecticut. When I lived in Connecticut, I literally lived about a block away from the ocean. Mm-hmm. Never been swimming in the ocean.
You did fishing though.
Yes, I have went fishing.
Okay.
In the ocean.
What year? How old were you when you were in Connecticut? 'Cause we kind of skipped over that.
Well, that was when my son was born, so probably about 24.
Okay.
I was raising 4 kids by the time I was like 23, 24.
Okay. All right. So your friend talks you into coming to Tennessee.
And and then I met some other friends, Jane and Chuck Skipper, and they started insisting I go to church with them out of Miracle Deliverance Tabernacle. Mm-hmm. And that's where I met Anthony Wynn. And when I asked Anthony Wynn to baptize me, he said yes.
He baptized you. Good.
He said yes.
Yes. And that's one thing
I loved that.
Well, and that's one thing I have to say. See, I've known the Wynn family my whole life. And one thing I have to give, I love Anthony. Such a tender, loving, and sweet man. And I've seen him deal with people in all different kinds of circumstances. And I've seen him, a friend of mine was talking about how he used to wear like the big spike collars and all this other stuff. He was all tough. I'm a skateboarder. And Anthony walks up to him. And he was expecting him to kind of, give him a hard time because he's the pastor. And my friend said, Anthony just looked at him and said, hey, what do you call these things? And just asked him about the clothes that he was wearing, that he was doing it out of a bad attitude. But Anthony didn't treat him as a rebellious teenager who had a bad attitude. He just treated him as, in a friendly way. And that affected him and touched him. And so Anthony has that heart and that gift. And so, props to our brother Anthony and the pastor for embracing you when you came.
Yeah, it was no hesitation too, and trust me, I was looking for it. It was no hesitation. It was yes.
Yeah,
dude, you're my guy, man. Sorry, I didn't mean to hit you so hard.
Well, yeah, and that so at this point, for the first time in your life.
Speaking of you're my guy, I absolutely love this dude, man. I really do.
Well, and so you've come to Tennessee. You meet the Skippers, and they talk you into or force you to come to church. Yeah. And so you meet Anthony, you get baptized, and you're now attending church for the first time on a regular basis.
Right. Yep, that was it.
And so ever since then, what year is this? This is
the when I moved here?
Yeah.
2009. Well, no, I started going to church in Anthony's 2010, okay. And I've been going there ever since. There was actually had some serious stuff going on with over nasty reaction of sulfa antibiotics, so I wasn't there for a while because I was in a real bad way. Yeah. It's like, what kind of moron injects sulfur into people? And nearly killed me with that crap.
Ask, talk, have conversations when you're getting prescriptions, because I have several friends who've had lifelong ailments because they took a prescription without asking. And if you just find out a little bit more, a lot of times they'll give you a different prescription that'll help you and not cause the problem. So that's a side issue, not spiritual necessarily, but it's important.
Yeah, and that's the only time that I haven't went there was when I had a real nasty reaction. I was rough, dude. Mm-hmm. I mean, real rough. But yeah, it's so rough. I don't even know.
And so through this time, you're establishing your life. You had your own business in town,
doing computers, yeah.
And I'd heard about you. I think I may have even met you during that time because I washed windows in town, and your neighbor that you were renting from the space from.
Skippers.
Yeah, the Skippers are trying to get you to have me wash your windows, and you're. I remember you're like, well, I have curtains over my windows. I don't really need them washed.
Well, yeah, I have, yeah. That well.
So we weren't friends. We didn't know each other.
I had all kinds of stuff on the Jane just wanted me to go in and tear everything apart so you could wash the windows. I'm like, dude, I'll get it, man. Don't worry about it.
Well, it's funny because we didn't know each other, didn't know this was going on, that we were going to become friends later on,
right?
And so over the years, but then you now. You don't have that business anymore, and now you are
working at Anthony's Oasis Ministries, at Oasis TV Ministries, Anthony Wynn, Miracle Deliverance Tabernacle is the church.
So the reason I point that out is because
I've worked there for like 7 years.
So you've been working there for a long time now, this is how God does things in our life, from having nothing to do with a spiritual life, anti-God, satanic. To now, you are at church every day,
literally every day. Yeah.
Literally, and that's your job is to work, and it's a real job. It's and
Saturday is the Sabbath day is the only day I don't go to church.
Exactly, and so that I just find that it's God has a sense of humor. Right. And to take a person like you, and now that's your job, that's where you work, and you go to church, and so we're tying this up, we're coming to the end of the story, but so we had met sort of, but not personally, right. And through a mutual friend, Esther Libby, we were getting together, a group of us were going bowling.
Well, we was going to go hiking, but if it got rained out, we were going to go bowling. So it got rained out, so we ended up going bowling, or going hiking. Yeah. I might have said that wrong.
And that's when you and I met for the first time in a social situation.
Right.
And so from that, it turned into a friendship, getting to know you more and more, and doing lots of fun things like kayaking and
more kayaking.
Yeah, more kayaking and more kayaking. Is there anything else but kayaking? Because that's life, right?
Yeah.
No, we love the river for sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that was about 2021. That's where we moved on to. And so that's where God has you. And so I'll just say this, hearing your story, and I, when you're recording things like this, you're always leaving stuff out. There's so many different details, and we didn't know exactly how long to take or where to go. But your story touched me when we first started becoming good enough friends to actually start talking about some of those details. I was just inspired because I was like, he's Bill. He goes to church and he works for the church, and that's the guy I know. I didn't know all this stuff, so I'm like, my eyes are open to the history of your life, and it's encouraging to see a person grow, to come through those things, and also seeing the hand of God in your life right now, because He's doing a work in you and pouring into you in ways that would just have been unimaginable 10, 20 years, 30 years ago, especially. All those things would have just been impossible to imagine. And so I love you, and I'm so glad to have met you and to be able to do this with you, but getting to know you, seeing God at work in your life, and it's an encouragement. It really is. And so I love being your friend and being able to do this with you. And so again, I appreciate you doing this. Thanks, and putting out the effort to record this with me.
Do it. By the way, something I know we didn't really clarify, but I would hope it wouldn't fall into question, but because of like the whole molestation thing, people saying you're molested, it was not a guy. Okay, don't go there. Never been there.
Well, I think that was clear.
well, because I said somebody said you were molested. You know what I mean? That's usually when you hear molestation or anything like that, it's always guys. It was not a guy. So I just wanted to clarify that because never been there, ain't going there. I just didn't want to,
Well, I think we've covered.
You may want to cut that, but
yeah, we might cut that out.
Yeah, but
that's the beauty of being able to record like this.
I don't want anybody, because as soon as you start talking molestation or something,
some people's minds.
Oh yeah, some dude was, what I mean? No, it was a woman, it was a girl.
Yeah. Well, that's as we're dealing with this. Your story has so many different ups and downs and twists and turns, and I really appreciate you doing this, and I think we've about tied it up. So I hope that this really does bless different people as this goes out, and you can share this with friends. And again, I always forget to do this. Like, subscribe, Share this with your friends. These types of stories, these type of things that I'm sharing on my podcast are intended to bless the body of Christ. Bill and I, right as we started this, that's one thing I talked to him because he's my first guest doing this, is we just sat here and we prayed. And we seek the Lord and ask Him to lead our thoughts, to give us the insight of where we need to go, what we need to cover. And when I'm doing the different episodes, that's what I'm doing. I spend way more time praying and thinking about it and asking God to lead me than I do actually recording, because that's the most important thing. So I love you guys, and we'll be back next time. See ya.